Welcome to 1189, an online Bible commentary. My name is Tyler Marston, and today we're taking a look at Mark chapter 8. We've talked a lot about all the different ways people have seen Jesus and thought about who he is. Some think he's a healer prophet who teaches the Bible with special authority. Some think he's too much of a break from the status quo and needs to be avoided. But who is Jesus really? And what is he trying to do? That's the question that's at the heart of Mark's gospel. And this chapter is the exact middle point of Mark's gospel. What's revealed is that Jesus is both exactly who we think he is and also completely unlike what we expected him to be. And he leaves us with a challenge. Will we follow him wherever he leads? In those days, when there was again a large crowd and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, "I feel compassion for the people, because they've remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance." And his disciples answered him, "Where will anyone be able to find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people?" And he was asking them, "How many loaves do you have?" And they said, 7. And he directed the people to sit down on the ground, and taking the 7 loaves, he gave thanks and broke them, and started giving them to his disciples to serve to them. And they served them to all the people. And they also had a few small fish, and after he had blessed them, he ordered these to be served as well. And they ate and were satisfied. And they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. A few chapters ago in Mark 6, we saw Jesus feed 5,000 families with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And here in Mark 8, Jesus does a very similar miracle with 4,000 families and 7 loaves of bread and a few fish. Although it's with a different group of people, and it's in a different place. We remember from the last chapter that he's still in Galilee, but he's expanding his reach and beginning to do more ministry in more predominantly Gentile villages. We see that once again, Jesus is compelled to feed all these people that are following him because he has compassion on them. And again, we also see the disciples initially hesitant, even though they were there a few weeks ago when Jesus fed 5,000 people. And immediately he entered the boat with his disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." Leaving them, he again embarked and went away to the other side. As soon as Jesus and his disciples disembark to continue teaching and healing, some Pharisees come up and accost him. They're still undecided as to whether or not Jesus is legit, and so they want him to do some miracle as a sign to prove himself. And it goes back to that overarching theme in Mark. Who is Jesus, really? Of course, Jesus has already performed several signs. He just fed 4,000 people, not to mention his baptism and his healings and his walking on water. But these Pharisees will only believe if they see a sign with their own eyes. The testimony of others is not credible enough. And that's exactly why Jesus says they're not going to get a sign. They want something from Jesus, but they don't feel like they need him. In sharp contrast to literally all of the people that he's healed, all of the people he's given a sign to. And they had forgotten to take bread and did not have more than 1 loaf in the boat with them. And he was giving orders to them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began to discuss with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, and how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up?" They said to him, 12. "When I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" And so it seems that even Jesus' closest disciples are still not understanding that he is the one who can meet all of their needs. When they don't bring enough bread for their journey and Jesus begins talking in parables, they assume they're being rebuked for not planning and meal prepping. But Jesus clarifies himself and reminds the disciples of all the miracles he's done, all the miracles they've seen. He quotes Jeremiah 5 to them, asking them if they, like the Pharisees, really have eyes and ears to understand his parables. And further thought on Jesus' words reveal that bewaring the leaven of the Pharisees is not a warning to remember physical food. It was a warning to avoid their teaching and their influence, their skepticism and their cynicism. It was a reminder to trust Jesus wholeheartedly. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees, walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Another healing in Bethsaida mirrors the healing of the deaf and mute man from chapter 7. Jesus brings this blind man, again, out of the village and heals him there. He gives him clarity and gives him the ability to literally see things he's never seen before. And then Jesus says to keep this healing on the down low, not make a big deal about it. Jesus seems to be doing these things in secrecy, in secluded places, for a reason. We've talked before about how he might be trying to avoid the logistical nightmare of having all these crowds of people following him at all times. We've also talked about the danger of Jesus' message spreading too quickly and it being interpreted as a revolutionary campaign against the Romans or against their puppet government. However, we also see in this story, especially in comparison to the Pharisees asking for a sign, we realize that Jesus wants his followers to be individuals who personally choose him. Jesus wants people to believe that he offers a hope that no one else can give. And that belief in him is a prerequisite for healing. Healing people so that others would believe in him? Well, that's manipulation. But healing people who already believe in him, that's the transformed life that only Jesus offers. Jesus went out, along with his disciples, to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do people say that I am?" They told him, saying, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, but others one of the prophets." And he continued by questioning them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered and said to him, "You are the Christ." And he warned them to tell no one about him. All through this gospel, we've seen speculation from all kinds of people about who Jesus really is, what he's doing, where he gets his power from, etc. Capitalizing on this theme, Mark places this story exactly in the middle of his gospel. While the first half was about raising all of these questions, the second half will begin to answer all of these questions as the narrative keeps unfolding. We saw how Herod and others thought that Jesus was a resurrected John the Baptist in Mark chapter 6. And we also remember from Malachi chapter 4 that the Jews were expecting a prophet like Elijah to return before God's arrival. But Peter says that Jesus is more than a prophet announcing God's future return. Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Anointed One himself, God's King who will rule the universe and reconcile creation back to its creator. And as expected by now, Jesus tells the disciples not to tell other people this truth yet. The reason being, Jesus' messiahship is not going to look anything like what the people, even the disciples, expect it to look like. And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. Jesus tells his disciples what's about to happen, plainly, without parables or ambiguity. He tells them that he's going to suffer, and he's going to die. He's going to be killed by his enemies, only to rise again 3 days later. He once again identifies himself with the Son of Man from Daniel chapter 7, a human-looking king empowered by God to have eternal dominion over all creation. But his kingship only comes about after all of this oppression and tyranny by these evil beasts representing pagan empires. Mysteriously, Jesus believes he will be enthroned as king, but it will be through his submission to death, not through coups and conquest and takeover. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Meanwhile, Peter is not buying any of this at all. I mean, if Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, well, that means he's going to bust some heads. I mean, have you ever read Psalm 2? He's going to bring the Romans to heel. He's going to bring the Sadducees and the Pharisees to heel. He's going to usher in God's unending kingdom. All this talk about an inevitable death is scary and depressing. And after all, God doesn't want his people to suffer. And so Peter thinks that Jesus just needs a little motivation, a little positive reinforcement. And so Peter actually begins to rebuke Jesus. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but man's." Jesus draws a line in the sand. That's not how we're going to do things. Jesus calls Peter Satan, transliteration of the Hebrew word for the adversary. He's saying that Peter is actively working against God's plan. When used as a proper noun, such as in Job 1, Satan is the figure of supreme evil and temptation that all humans have to fight against. Jesus is saying that Peter here is succumbing to the temptation to want power and ambition in the here and now, and that he's not focused on God's ultimate plan for the reconciliation of creation. And we know from Mark 1 that even Jesus has been tempted before with this same desire. But all of that does raise the question, how is Jesus going to be enthroned as king if he submits to his own death? And he summoned the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what will a man give in exchange for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Jesus will not be enthroned in spite of his death, but because of it. And Jesus wants us to follow him in that endeavor, sacrificing everything, our ambitions, our desires, even our lives, to follow his example. Jesus could very easily send out angels to conquer Rome by force. And in doing so, he would gain all the riches and power that the world has to offer. But he would lose his own soul, the core of his being. He would miss out on the death-defeating power of his resurrection. Jesus ultimately trusts in God, even through his suffering, his persecution, his death. Jesus knows that God will vindicate him and ultimately crown him in glory. And this is why the gospel is inherently filled with hope for all people. No matter what you're going through, no matter what you're suffering, God sees you and he wants good things for you. And when we humbly accept that maxim, instead of trying to fight back against the persecution of the world, we leave it all in God's hands, fully trusting and knowing that he will vindicate us, even if we're killed. That's what it means to take up your cross and to follow Jesus. So are you prepared? Thanks for watching 1189. I hope that you have a good day, and God bless.